Hey, how's it going, everybody? Starting the morning out early, and today we're going to talk about LFOs. So, lot to talk about. Hydrasynth, by far, is definitely one of the best synthesizers for sheer amount of LFOs that it has. It's got 5, plus that universal one that controls the vibrato over in the voice menu, as you can see right down there. Well, yeah, if we do an init patch, it pretty much defaults, as you'll see. Vibrato amount 2. You move that mod wheel up. So if you want to get rid of, if you're a new owner and you want to get rid of that, that's how you do it. Turn the vibrato amount to 0, and turn that to, well, it doesn't even matter actually at that point. But if you want a little bit, you know. Okay. With that out of the way, that was for any of you new owners that, I know that drives new owners crazy. I know it did with me. It took a few minutes to find it, but okay. So the LFOs on this are very versatile, and they might look a little daunting and complex to somebody who's new to this stuff, but it's actually pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it. So I'm going to be using examples to kind of demonstrate different functions of the LFOs, and I think it's probably best to do that with a basic patch. So here I have an init patch. I'm going to turn on a little bit, just a touch of chorus, just so it's a little more pleasant on the ears, and just a wee bit of reverb, of some plate reverb. Okay. So LFO 1 by default is modulated, or it can be assigned to the filter with just the knob up at the top right. It's probably a little hard to see, but just look up here. As soon as you turn that up or down, it will use whatever you assigned on LFO 1 to start modulating the filter up and down. All right. By default, this is bipolar, meaning it goes both plus and minus, I believe. Even though there's a plus and minus right up here, don't let that fool you. I believe this is, by default, this would be bipolar. So let me explain that. Bipolar means 2 directions. So not only would the LFO modulate it up, but it would also modulate it down, where the center point would be the starting point. So let's get a visual of that. That would be right there, the middle, as you can see. If you draw a straight line across there, that's the starting point. And then that would be end point. So it goes up and down. Now, if we just did unipolar, that would have to be done with a mod matrix, and certainly can be done. And I'm going to demonstrate that real quick, the difference. First, I'm going to select LFO 1. So I went into my mod matrix right there, type in LFO 1. I'm going to scroll down 1, and then I'm going to press filter. And but up here, this is where you're going to have to change it. So by default, LFO 1 without anything else after it, that's bipolar. If you keep turning past all the LFOs, it restarts into LFO 1 plus. That's unipolar. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to get something ready so I can. Yeah, I think that should be able to demonstrate the example properly now. Okay, so as you can tell, before I assign that modulation, right, when I put it at 0 and there's no modulating going on, and this is at center up here, we can hear it, right? A little bit, right? Okay, well, assign it with unipolar, and you will still hear it after it returns from its, shape. So we're going to, as you can see, the shape of LFO 1, we're starting up high. It's boosting it up, and then it's going down. Now with bipolar, this would actually take it, bipolar, we're starting here, would take it down further, and we wouldn't be able to hear it. And that's what I'm about to demonstrate when I turn this up here, if I'm correct. Hopefully I am. Otherwise I'm going to have to reshoot this video. But yeah. Let's sync it for the hell of it. Why not, right? Quarter notes. Oh, well, what if we reversed that and made it sound sort of like side chaining, right? Well, that's when you adjust the phase. The phase is where in the form of that shape the LFO will begin when it's triggered. So if we make it exactly 180 out of the 360 degrees possible in the phase, that will be exactly halfway, and that will be exactly the opposite of what the original shape was. You can tell the original shape had it up here. What we're looking at now is the exact opposite. And sure enough, it's on the offbeats now. If you add a little bit of smooth, you can start to make it sound like sidechaining. Right? Okay. That is by doing it in the mod matrix. Well, let's turn this off, and I'm going to show you what it's like to do that with just the, I'll just delete that. You can still hear it, right? Well, turn this up. Okay, so the difference is when I'm turning the knob up here, which is the default automatically LFO1 assigned to the filter routing. I gotta smooth out the words on that one. I'm not really the fixed, there we go, the fixed static routing to the filter. It is bipolar, so you got to remember that. So that means the way we have things now, it's actually going to kill the sound because the filter's going not only up, but it's going down too. It's going both directions. That is absolutely crucial to remember when you are toying around with LFOs, because if you forget that, you might think it should be doing one thing and it'll be doing another thing, and you'll be wondering why. And that's because you have it bipolar instead of unipolar, especially when you're dealing with pitch and filter, obviously, because it cuts stuff out. So all we can hear now is the up part, but it might sound unipolar, but it's not. It's bipolar because we can't hear the the middle, the regular notes. So, and its lowest point, it is actually going lower. It's going like way down. So there's that explained. Hopefully that's clear to you. So we have unipolar and bipolar. That is the first big thing to know. Second big thing to know, I actually kind of already showed you, and that's the sync function. There's two functions of, kind of determining how fast an LFO cycles, and that is the rate in hertz when it's not synced, or if you turn on BPM sync, it is subdivisions of the beats, right? And then the shape right here, obviously. A lot of interesting things can be done when you begin adjusting the phase, but don't forget that you adjusted the phase, because that'll really throw you off and screw you up when you're making stuff. Let's make something like a really basic sequence using different LFOs, and I think that's going to be the best way to teach you how each LFO interacts. So I think we're going to turn LFO1 into a unipolar routing to filter. So remember what I did, I went to mod matrix and pressed LFO1, and then I pressed filter, and it automatically assigned it there. Now when you're assigning it to filter 1, it's defaulting to cutoff. When you assign it to filter 2, it's going to default to morph, and you got to scroll over 1 to get to cutoff. Simple, right? Back up. Oops. I'm going to make the shape of LFO1 a saw down. Why does it sound like that? Because smooth is still turned on. Smooth turned off, it sounds much more punctual, much more punchy. At certain points in time, LFO1 standard, like bipolar, and LFO1 unipolar are going to sound pretty close to one another, depending on, it's just all relative. You can get the same exact effect doing LFO1 plus, but it sounds like the filter cutoff just went up, but it didn't. But that sounds pretty similar to what we had before. From what I remember, a more drastic contrast, of course, we'll be using up here the fixed routing, and a more subtle effect is going to be using this. Let's make it 16th notes to really get it cooking here. Or maybe 8th notes will do. Turn that off. Hear the difference? I'm using the fixed routing up here. Now I'm going to turn the modulation with the unipolar back on. More travel in the entire length of the cycle. So unipolar uses this entire shape, right? Bipolar is only using a snippet of it. So you have half of the cycle where it's actually dipping down further than you want it to, which is why I use a lot of Mod Matrix manual routing rather than this fixed routing up here. But this is also useful later on to really get stuff moving, especially if you have LFO1 defaulting to quarter notes, which I often do because it has that. Since I do a lot of dance music, sometimes I do want a little bit of a bounce or a side, like a side chain effect, and that's totally easy when you're using the fixed routing up here and you got this set to quarter notes. Plus, a lot of times when I'm trying to figure out polyrhythms, I have some sort of anchor set with a very mild routing somewhere like that, so I can hear the quarter notes. And you might notice something here. They're polyphonic LFOs. Naturally, it's a polysynth. That's a cool thing, and that is due to this, right? There's several modes. Trigger sync polyphonic. Each key triggers its own timed LFO, its personal LFO. So this one has an LFO that's timed to it, and this one has an LFO that's timed separately depending on, when you press it. Which can be neat if you speed up the LFO to like 16th. Eighth notes always works good. All right. Sometimes you can do polyrhythms like that and not have to do the work yourself doing this. You can have another LFO doing work, right? So why don't we try assigning another LFO to the filter? Let's do LFO 2. Actually, I'm going to use LFO 3 in this case, because LFO 2, I'm going to show you something later. LFO 3, we're going to assign to filter 1. I'm going to do cutoff. We're going to sync it. And we're going to do dotted quarter notes, I think. So dotted quarter notes and dotted eighth notes are never going to land evenly on the start of every 4-bar phrase, or I'm sorry, every 4 bars, 8 bars, that kind of thing. But they're still useful and they sound cool. The only thing you got to remember is if you're planning on making something like that, just realize that you're going to have to be re-triggering it to make it sort of even back out. So you can make all sorts of cool sequences, and it's half the work of normally playing it by hand or, tweaking stuff by hand. All right, quick tip. This is sort of a little off the reservation. The smooth factor, I did mention that earlier, but if we're not modulating the filter and we're doing stuff like mutants and oscillator wavetables, and you're using the LFOs to modulate those, the smooth factor can really add some wild and twisted transients and warping sort of characteristics. Maybe let's try that right now. This is all impromptu on the fly. I'm just really hoping it goes smoothly and doesn't get too boring, but also doesn't get too convoluted or obscure. But let's find a nice, I'm gonna get a wave scan. I'm gonna find one of my go-to tables. Horizon is good, but I think there's another one I like. Yeah, Scorpio. We're going to change all these routings up here to Oscillator 1's wavetable. So I just basically pressed Oscillator 1, and now I'm scrolling over to Wave Scan. Same thing right here. I just hit down twice to get to Filter 1. Press Oscillator 1, and then I'm going to go to Wave Scan. Actually, you know what? Let's make this one a mutant. Mutant 1 depth, and I'm going to keep that at 0. We're going to deal with that a little bit later. And I'm going to use, actually, I'm going to cheat here and use LFO 1 to get a little bit of that filter back. Okay. LFO 3 is doing the wave scan stuff. What do we have LFO 3 at? Quarter notes. Or I'm sorry, dotted quarter notes. Let's do another one. Let's have LFO 4 doing... Do we have one? Okay, no, we got LFO 1 doing eighth notes. No, I want a square wave in there. So there we go. Got square, eighth notes, LFO 4. I'm going to go LFO 4 to Oscillator 1, wave scan, but I don't want it to be LFO 4. I want it to be LFO 4 plus. Oopsies. Oh, by the way, if you want to go back to your LFO screen and you don't hit exit, this is going to change what you just edited it. Watch. LFO 4 plus. If I don't hit exit or back, right? And then I think I'm going to go back to any section, really. If I think I'm going to go back to Mutant 2 or Mutant 1 or anywhere, when you press that, it's going to end up, well, when you press LFO 4 to get there, it's going to actually change back. I guess it doesn't do it for all of them, but yeah, it's a frequent mistake that I make, so something to keep in mind. So make sure once you've selected it, hit exit, then you can go to the LFO 4 screen. Oh, LFO 3. Oh, that's why I was at triplets. Okay, so I have LFO 4 unipolar, not bipolar. So I'm going to crank that up, and it's only going to be going up. So it's going to be doing eighth notes, pushing up. So I'm kind of looking for sort of a data kind of thing going on. Because it kind of sounds cool when you're using chimes or keys. At this point, this is where the sound designer kind of preference kicks in. What I'm doing right now is I'm listening for the way it's interacting, and I'm determining how much modulation is going to be happening with each. Yes, I realize there's a cat missing, and I think it actually sounds pretty good as is. Too much, sort of sounds like it's puking. Yeah, so it sounds like a little like puking keys. Blip, 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 blip. That sounds nice. All right, I'm gonna go back to LFO 4 now. Let's try that smooth trick here. Well, you could already hear it kick in as soon as you got about 10 in, maybe 10 or 12. There's one. Let's try the other one. got that flam now. All that from 3 mod routings, and we already got sort of, it sounds like a sequence. It's not really a sequence. I'm sure with a lot of trickery though, it can it'll make for a great rhythm bed, and from there you can just stylize it. And this is this was the focus on Ignition 2 versus Ignition 1. Ignition 1, I went ham. I did go ham on Ignition 2 when we're talking about modulations and how many slots I used. But I also, as a drummer, I know that less is more sometimes. So with that mentality, I focused on getting the most beautiful, coolest sounding patches I could with the minimal amount of routing. One, to give the people who have had Hydrasynth a while now a chance to add on, rather than deal with something that's already completed and has 32 mod slots filled. And secondly, because sometimes simplicity is more beautiful. Sometimes there's much less to worry about, and of course there is much less to worry about. And at this point, all I'd have to do is duplicate these actually, I'd only have to duplicate 2 of them to get a stereo thing going on. And that I was going to have as a separate video. In fact, I probably will have it as a separate video just in case somebody doesn't watch this one. But I design most presets in stereo, especially when it comes to polyphonic, like stuff that I'm going to play like a tune. So right now, I'm going to duplicate whatever I have on Oscillator 1, and I'm going to show you how much better this can sound. I'm going to go to Oscillator 2. I'm going to turn that into wave scan. I'm going to go here. I'm going to hold the Shift key and twist this until I get to Scorpio. Get over here. Okay, that's Scorpio. Okay, it is Scorpio. That's taken care of. Now, I'm going to go back to my mod matrix, and I'm going to duplicate. So that's LFO 3 to Oscillator 1 wave scan at 64.8. Do it right underneath it. Oscillator 2 wave scan, 64.8. Doesn't have to be exact. In fact, you could actually make it a little bit off, and it would probably create a little bit more of a stereo field. I'm kind of a stickler. I like to have them even and then just generate the stereo field via the detuning. And yeah, I mean, something I could probably have afforded to experiment more with is seeing how much more of a stereo field can be created by having a little bit of an offset between the Oscillator 1 and Oscillator 2 for other routings besides just detuning. But yeah, for a clean uniform image, ideally you'd want them to be identical. And it would still sound stereo. So LFO 4 to Oscillator 2. Wave scan, 38.8. There. All right. Alpha 1, well that, yeah, I haven't assigned anything to that. Although we could. Maybe later. All right. The next step to getting it to sound stereo involves a couple of things. One, turning up Oscillator 2. In fact, you know what, just to be safe, keep it at 100. And this will give us an option of you know, adding a little bit more if we want to. Oh man, that's a tricky one. There we go. There. Okay. 100 each. Now, we got 2 choices with panning. When panning is concerned, you can hit the mixer button a few times or scroll down so you get to the portion where you can pan them individually, or you can just simply create a macro, which is a lot easier. Well, speaking of which, I like doing this. I get all these darn macro labels out of there, so it's just cleaner. There's As you can tell, I've done this a lot, so it only takes me a second or two. Oops. Okay, macro 1. I hit macro assign, then I pressed in the number 1 up here. And the bottom is nice and clean because it's just 2 of them. It's the bottom 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 macro slots per macro. This one I'm going to have mixer, oscillator 1 pan. This one's going to be mixer, oscillator 2 pan. We're setting the max value here. And then up here in the middle would be the max value for if we engaged the button rather than turning the knob. So the bottom value is an analog travel path, and the top one is going to be fixed. I don't really bother with the top one for this sort of thing. You can go wide on this one. You're going to pan opposite sides. So this one's going to be negative, that one's going to be positive, or vice versa if you prefer. Doesn't really matter. There. As we kick this in, oh yeah, we want to name it, don't we? I always like putting stereo, but if you're lazy or don't like picking letters picking letters out, you can just find the W's, and it's in the fixed naming it'll say width. Oops, that's oops. Stereo. Let's check it out. Oh, detune. One last step, detune. Oscillator 1. I'm going to have that going up by 2 or 3. I'm going to have this one going down by 3. There's center image. There's the wide image. This is the fun part. When you have something going like this, you could always go back and change your wavetables. Can really get it sounding good. Go to your mutant 2 and your mutant 4 and turn those to wave stack, and that's sort of the final piece. That is what you just witnessed is pretty much the bread and butter formula for any of the keys that I design, or a lot of the polyphonic kind of synthy classic stuff too, as you can tell. Depth I always have right around 25 to 35, but on this, why don't I just show you how I'm building a macro here, and then we're going to go back into teaching more about LFOs. But I just wanted to build this to kind of give you an idea of how you can enhance something that you've just built that has movement, like I showed you with the LFOs. This way you can make it sound great. All right, we'll just build that macro here. I'm going to twist it one left and then just find stack, which is S. It should be in there. That stank. Well, close enough. And then I can edit that and put a C instead of, yeah. All right, fair enough. Mutant 1, mutant 4, I'm sorry, mutant 2 and mutant 4 depth. And we'll have that range of another 10 or maybe 15. Come on. Hold shift, that'll help. There we go. Okay, so let's go back to our LFOs. We got LFO 1, doing eighth notes. Nothing's really happening with it. As you can see, we're using LFO 3 and LFO 4. Bipolar, unipolar. This one's set up as unipolar. And we are using it, actually, yeah, we are using it a little bit, but we're not using it through this routing, so we can just delete that. Up here. I don't like using a whole lot of negative modulation on this because it just sort of screws up the beat a little bit because it's rising instead of plucking or dropping. All right, brace yourself. I'm actually going to turn the volume up here. All right, why don't I show you how to use the, we'll go to LFO 5, and I'm going to use the step sequencer on the LFO. So on the shapes over here, you can see all the different shapes, and you're scrolling through. You got pulse. This is sample and hold, so that's going to be randomized. That's a great one. I had that a lot in an Ignition 1 and some of the industrial patches because I'd have a sample and hold LFO chopping around oscillator 3's waveform type. So, and it would just create all these crazy industrial textures, especially when you have a little bit of distortion or modulation, or have LFO or have oscillator 3 controlling it as an FM source. But we're going to go past that, past noise, past random, and into step. And that's not the actual shape. That's just an example. We're going to sync it, turn BPM sync on. And why don't we do 16th notes? Because that's fun. It's quick. And they're going to be, for now, tri-sync, poly, phase. We can keep the phase at 0 for these unless you really know what you're doing. Because it's kind of a pain in the ass to program when the phase is off. Nice thing about the 1.5 update firmware is that you can go way high with this. 64 steps. It's basically a built-in sequencer. Smart move too. A great feature. I love it. I used it a lot for Ignition 2. Not as much as I would have hoped, but it's very time consuming, and you really have to know what you want. Well, I thought I should probably know what I want to be spending, 2 hours plus with one patch dealing with this when you don't even know if it's going to turn out the way you like it. So for this sort of thing, I think it's going to be very well suited for modulating Mutant 1 and Mutant 3 because we haven't used it yet, and those are two wide open things that can really affect the sound quite a bit. So we've got that all configured the way we need it, right? Semi-lock is a nice one if you're dealing with pitches. I use that maybe once or twice. Don't worry about it in the meantime, though. Most of the time, it's not really necessary unless you're dealing with pitch. Oh yeah, let's go to the mod matrix and let's set our routings for Mutant 1 and Mutant 3. So we're gonna have LFO 5, Mutant 1, LFO 5, Mutant 3. But we're gonna go back and make those positive. So unipolar. And we don't want to adjust the ratio, we want to adjust the depth. And these are at 100% wet. Depth is 0 for each of them. Right now it's in pulse width, the original method. And let's crank it up to, I don't know, 60. Okay. Also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change LFO 2 BPM sync on. I'm going to change this to 16th notes. Right? I'm going to turn the level all the way down, and I'm going to show you something in a little bit. Now I got to make this, oops, turn the level back up when you're picking your shape. Free tip. Saw down. Level 0, phase 0. Rate 16. Okay, we're okay. Got routing set. Let's ask ourselves, do we really want to use pulse width? First of all, I'm going to make a macro to help me determine that. By doing this, mutant 1, mutant 3, depth, max it out. Right. Now we can have now we can do the test, basically the depth test for each of the mutant types, and see how we like them. Let's try squeeze instead. Let's get the cutoff a little bit up. Oh yeah, there we go. A lot of high end. Ooh, that was kind of neat. I wonder if the feedback is going to make a big difference. At this point, I'm trying to listen for different interesting things happening, because depending on where I'm turning it, I'm going to want to keep that in mind for how much modulation I want to assign, and how, you know, when I'm assigning the steps. So it'd be kind of cool if we had it maxed out by default and then dropped it. Like down, down, down. Okay, that's kind of a cool idea. I like that. Let's go back in here and crank the depths up to max. And then let's make these negative, right? So it's still unipolar, but it's dropping them in one direction instead of lifting them in one direction. Think of it like that. So, and what we're doing is we're pulling down the depth, because with pulse width, obviously, when you're at max, you're squeezing it to nothing, almost. So for this one, we're almost using it as like a reverse, kind of a filter. It sort of sounds like a filter effect, but you know, it's got a different characteristic to it. Let's just make it maxed out, because we don't need, you know, we can always determine that in the step sequencer itself. But remember, when it's same applies with this step sequencer on the LFO when you're dealing with unipolar versus bipolar. In this step sequencer, I'm going to go to LFO 5. I'm going to go down, and then you see that? That's step edit. That's where we actually go in and edit it. Remember, this line right here, that's center. Whoops. You can go below center and above center, as you can see. See that? Well, when we're dealing with unipolar, everything at the bottom is resting. So that's where everything, that's what it should look like right now. So I set everything to 0 to start out with. Oh, right, there's 2 rows, forgot. There we go. And there we go. So as soon as I change this, like the first few steps, we should start hearing results. Oh yeah. Let's go low. Okay, that's cool. That's really cool. I don't think I've done anything like that before. Let's get the smooth down just a little bit. All right, sorry, I went into an LFO, started doing other stuff. Oh, the second trick I was going to show you. So we got a 16 step phrase, right? Well, I want to show you another trick that we can do simultaneously using LFO 5. So let's just jump out. We're in the main screen here. I don't think I have any use for that that macro anymore, but I'm going to label it just in case. I'm going to label it PWM, just so we know what it's doing. Yeah, pulse width is fine. Even though it's squeezed, it's part of a type of pulse width. I'm going to go to my mod matrix, and I'm going to assign LFO5 to LFO2 level. And I'm going to make it unipolar. And we have several options at this point. So anytime LFO5 is dancing, jumping up, right, in that pattern right here, it's going to increase the level of LFO2, because right now it's at 0. It's going to increase the level of LFO2, which is just spinning along at 16th notes. So anything I modulate now with LFO2 is now a product of LFO5's rhythm as well, but it's not in a strict sequence, in an on-off sequence, so to speak. This is sort of like on-off. It's not, it's just different levels of on-off, but there's no shape. There's no, so your dynamics are going to be way different, and it's not ideal. You'd want more character, right? So that's what LFO2's job is doing, is if anything that I want in that rhythm, but not like in the same fashion, that's what it's for. In fact, we could do the same thing. We could change these from LFO5 to LFO2 now, and it should have a potentially similar effect. I could probably demonstrate. Might as well demonstrate it right now here. LFO2 plus, LFO2 plus. Not always ideal for that kind of thing, though, as you can tell. Because you don't want, if we're dealing with mutants, sometimes nice, even static levels just in increments are going to sound a lot cleaner. And this is exactly why for some things, you'd want to use a step LFO, where other times, like a filter, it might sound actually better using LFO2. So that's what I was actually thinking of doing, is using LFO2 to modulate a filter. Another thing you could do is there's a fixed routing. Some people might not even know about under amp. You go under amp and go to LFO2 amount, and that's actually going to control your amp envelope. We should start hearing that polyrhythm here in a second if I start cranking this up. It's going to start sounding a lot more drastic. Huh? As you can see, this is how I waste an entire day on the Hydrasynth. Get something like that going, and then you start programming Poly Aftertouch, and then macros and a freaking expression pedal. I can't tell you how good an expression pedal is for Hydrasynth, given all that's on here. It just adds that one extra layer. Well, it adds an extra layer to any synth, but on Hydrasynth, it's just awesome, because it's just like, I don't know, it's like throwing sugar, extra sugar in your Kool-Aid, or throwing Adderall in your Kool-Aid. That's probably a better analogy. Or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, that's exactly what I mean when I was talking about why it's important to have, a distinguished shape as an optional alternative to this kind of jagged on-off-y sort of sequence. Some other things you could apply that to would be dry-wet stuff, because that works kind of well. It sometimes produces a desirable effect, other times not so much. We could try it. Let's try dry-wet off, or maybe no. Let's do it the same way we did the other one. We'll have it from on to off, getting modulated off. So these hits basically are going to be when the stack effect is turned off. Let's see how that sounds. I haven't tried it that much, to be honest, but it might actually sound kind of neat. All right, we're gonna make those unipolar. Let's go to dry wet, mutant 2 and mutant 4 dry wet, and let's have that just turning them off. Well, we should probably turn down that amp thing a little bit less effective. try the opposite. Let's try turning these off and cranking up positive values. Maybe if we added some release, that might work. Ooh, we're getting some weird... that does not sound desirable at all, does it? Okay, so it was feedback. And probably this too. Maybe not. Okay. Well, get this crank back up. Okay, that's definitely a big one. So I've showed you that, and I actually... it went a lot quicker than I thought it would. Oh, okay. So then, as I mentioned earlier, the little tricks you could do would be to add a little bit of smooth to it. And that sort of has a glide effect, as you can tell. You know what I kind of want to get back to is I want to get the cutoff back down and get that some of that LFO dancing going on here. Check it, check it, check it, check it, check it, check. Just a touch of that, and then another LFO 2 doing the same thing with that filter. Get the resonance up a little. Oops. See, when you start adjusting parameters and you haven't left the mod matrix, I tell you, man, it can really f your day up. Oops, and then there we go. Cut off. So now it's a little closed. You got the option of doing expression routings with the expression pedal or a poly aftertouch. Let's try both, So I'm gonna just twist around until I see poly aftertouch. And then I'm going to go to, let's see, what am I gonna do? Just direct cutoff. We can do that. Not a big fan of that. Maybe a little bit of that. So I'm just going to crank the cutoff back up here. That's a little better. Another thing you could do instead of that, you could think about, this is by, oops, oh man, that's supposed to be off. There we go. Yeah, sorry about that. Oh man, my point was like not, it was illustrated, but it was not actually illustrated the way it needed to be, and my ears didn't pick it up. Okay, so this was on the whole time, right? But if we don't want it on completely, because LFO 5 is actually cranking up some of that level. So ideally speaking, we'd want to have it a little bit lower, but not all the way, but enough to get the amplitude modulations going. So we might have to end up increasing the LFO2 amount, the fixed routing to LFO2 to the amplitude to get more of that rhythm, that 16th note rhythm. But we just don't want to crank up LFO2 to the point where LFO5 is barely making an effect. I think it's gonna, it's gonna involve cranking this up. Yeah, see? Let's go back and get that LFO2 routing filter cut off a little higher. Okay, so one thing we could think about doing is adding a poly aftertouch routing, not to filter cutoff per se, but to instead LFO2 level. That's really going to chop things up since you got the amplitude envelope routing hard fixed and maxed out to LFO2. So as soon as that level goes up to max, volume off and volume max are going to be in the shape of that triangle. You know, that's your amp. A little bit different than your volumes in your mixer. Keep that in mind. Yeah. So that's one possibility. And if I get really eccentric and really OCD about this, sometimes I will build in like 3 or 4 different effects that are sort of like this, but a little different. So this one would be LFO2 level. The next one would be literally modulating LFO2 to filter cutoff. So it would only add 16th notes to the filter, right? But I would keep them at 0, and then I would add macros so you could change the modes, change the way you are expressive with it. Problem with that is sometimes it's hard to describe what it's doing. Other times it's completely impractical, where it makes not much of a difference, not enough of a difference to even be useful to you when I'm designing patches, you know, for patch banks. You know, where it's me, if I'm designing for a track, I'm actually kind of sloppy about it, and I'll just go back and manually adjust it if I end up wanting it. Maybe let's try routing it to both. Poly. Oops, I passed it. Aftertouch, and then let's route that to a mod matrix number 12. See what I did there? So that's source 10 through 12. 10, 11, 12. This is position 12. What I did is I made poly aftertouch affects the depth of the slot 12, and we're going to have it max out. Well, maybe not max out, but really jack up the filter. There you go. Huge pronounced effect. Sometimes it's fun to program it the opposite of that, so it's like this by default. And then when you press it, it becomes an audible, smooth note. Like that. I think the expression pedal would probably do well just to have as cutoff control. Right, the envelope release needs to go down. Envelope 2. Okay, so yeah, a lot of neat stuff going on here. I'm going to play with the smooth a little bit. I'm sorry, you couldn't see what I was doing there, but sometimes you can get really funky like that and just make them weird shapes. You know, if we go far enough into smooth, then it just becomes a jagged field of triangles. It's important when you're selecting your LFOs to make a sequence to have a diverse set of polyrhythm, or a diverse set of rates. It's tricky because sometimes you get so kind of narrowed in on an idea that you realize you don't quite have enough LFOs for certain things. So a bit of advice: if you want to use a bunch of different diving pluck shapes, or saw down, consider instead using an envelope triggered by by any of these at the rate. So just make sure the rates vary, because you can always go back up into an envelope now that it's 1.5 firmware, and you can have press envelope 3 a few times, and you'll get to the point where you can actually assign things to trigger it, LFO 1 through LFO 5, stuff like that. That doesn't always work for everything that you'd want an LFO to do, but they certainly do alleviate a lot of the some of the burdens or some of the duties. So yeah, one thing I typically have is at least one of them in a quarter note. In this case, there's nothing with a quarter note. We have actually one with an eighth note, one with a dotted eighth, 16th notes. LFO 4 is doing eighth notes for some reason. We could turn that to quarter and it would be just fine too. And then LFO 5 is the step sequencer. For this kind of thing, I like to use pan delay or LCR delay. LCR delay is real tricky though. You got to be careful if you're syncing it up. You don't, generally speaking, it can sound really messy on anything besides 1/4. Let me give you an example. See what eighth note sound? That doesn't really. Just hear that blah, 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 blah in the background because it's doubling it. Same thing with that. It's kind of going. When you get up to 16th notes, and it actually produces kind of a weird effect. Sort of like a grungy delay, or a grungy reverb almost. But yeah, if you want a little bit more of a traditional... Oops. Would be stereo, basic stereo. Da, da, da. Sorry, I'm adjusting LFO 1. I'm sorry, envelope 1. At this point, I'm just building a patch. Whoopsies. Oh, play around with your filter types too, man. Well, there you have it. God, I feel like I'm definitely missing something. It could not have gone this quickly. Okay, yes. Trisync. These are the other modes, right? Oops. There's poly, there's single, and off. Okay, in other words, if we have this off, this is a free running LFO that has no effect. It is not being re-triggered by anything, no matter what you have configured to it. When you have it on single, that means the initial hit of a note is going to trigger the start of it. But as long as you have something held, as long as you have a note held, it's going to continue. It's not going to reset itself. This is ideal for if you have like a sequence like that, but you have something on a 2 and a 4, like a snare drum or like a pretend snare drum. Because as long as you're holding down the notes and doing legato stuff, it's going to keep the groove consistent and won't kind of start on an offbeat or something like that. Because it's not like you're just playing on on downbeats the whole time. So yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. Oh, I forgot. I had my pedal on that whole time. So yeah, just think of Trisync single, trigger sync single as legato. Poly being it's going to restart each time, and then that is your free running LFOs. So I know what I'll do. I can show you another useful trick for LFOs. Why don't we go ahead and hit save on this and save it. We're going to call this Groove Chimes. Nobody wastes this much open air time on television or anywhere aside from Mr. Rogers. who I've been exposing my kids to a lot lately. And boy, oh boy, that'll teach your kids patience. Groove, chime. What I wanted to show you was assigning LFO 4 and LFO 5 with sample and hold, all right, and a very low rate can function as sort of a simulation of the detuning kind of instability of analog circuitry, VCOs. Right? That's why I call these VCO tropes. And this temp tune, or temperature, or tune, is like supposed to simulate the conditions that would cause that sort of thing. So I have a range here for depth 1 and depth 2. Let me get that back here. Hold on. Negative 1, positive 1. Get that filter a little bit. All right, so if I turn this macro up, what I'm doing is basically turning up mod matrix depth 1 and mod matrix depth 2, positive and negative each value. And that's what these are. Mod matrix depth 1 is LFO 5, modulates oscillator 1's pitch. Same thing, LFO 4 modulates oscillators 2's pitch. I have these at 0 because the macros are doing that work. They are telling, when I crank it up, they're telling the mod matrix to make those alterations. A little bit too much. Another thing you could try doing is, in addition to that, you could just go oscillator 1, oscillator 2, pitch, and just a tiny amount, right? Just a wee bit, right? So like positive 0.5 or, I don't know. Yeah, let's invert it here. There we go. Real tiny amounts. There you go. Oh, I had it. Yeah, negative 5.5. Right. Now you can still hear a difference when you're in the lower. I'll tell you, the final thing I was going to show you here is when the LFOs are doing that work and just the subtle detuning, it actually paved the way for you to open up reverb, crank up reverb. And when you have a lot of detuning going on, a lot of activity, it really helps the reverb out. Or can, in theory. It's been a while since I used this reverb, so yeah. Okay, I think that wraps up LFOs. If you have additional questions, happy to make another video since this is way quicker than I thought it would go. And otherwise, well, yeah, I think the next one we'll cover after this is filters and I don't know. Oh, modulating your modulators. Yeah, that's another cool one. Just the mod matrix in general. So thanks for watching and see you next time.